10 years to the day after our wedding, my wife walked out on our 2 kids and me for a man waiting in a car at the curb. It was 7 in the morning. I was still holding the anniversary card I had bought her. He didn't even turn the engine off. She stepped over our daughter's crayons, past the little card our daughter had made her, and didn't look back. Our son asked where Mommy was going. She answered without stopping. "They'll only slow me down." 4 words to a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. Then the door clicked and the house went silent. I didn't fall apart. I couldn't. 2 small people needed breakfast. 2 years later, she came back, and the woman who said those 4 words wanted to call herself their mother again. I'm Chase, 34, a high school science teacher who thought steady meant safe. To understand what she came back to ask for, you have to start in that silent kitchen with 2 kids who kept waiting by the window. Let me take you to that morning. I remember the light, early July light, thin and gold, coming through the kitchen window over the sink. I'd been up since 5:30. I had the coffee going and the card propped against the sugar jar, and I was frying the first batch of anniversary pancakes when I heard the suitcases. You know the sound of a suitcase you didn't pack, that hard plastic drag across a wood floor. 2 of them. Bianca came down the stairs in clothes I didn't recognize, not the clothes she wore to her job at the salon. A cream coat in July, heels, her hair done like she was going somewhere that had a name. I said, "Where are you going, babe?" "I made pancakes." She looked at the pancakes like they were something she'd already left behind. "Chase," she said, "I can't do this anymore." I thought she meant the pan, the mess, the morning. She meant the life. A car pulled up outside, black, low, the kind of car that doesn't belong on a street of split levels and above-ground pools. Through the window, I watched a man get out. Silver hair, a watch that caught the sun. He came up our porch steps like he'd done it before, and something in my chest turned to ice because I understood then that he had. Our son came out of his room rubbing his eyes. Milo was 8 that summer, all knees and cowlick. He saw the suitcases. He saw his mother's coat. He's a smart kid. He always was. "Mommy, are we going on a trip?" She didn't answer him. She was checking her phone. Ivy came next, 5 years old, dragging Biscuit, the gray stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was a baby, one ear chewed soft. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the strange man on our porch and pressed the rabbit to her mouth. The man knocked twice, then just opened the door. Our door. Like it was a formality. "Bianca," he said, "car's running." I found out his name later. Preston Vale. He built condominiums and he wore his money the way some men wear cologne. You could smell it across a room. I stood there with a spatula in my hand. "Bianca," I said, "what is this?" She picked up the suitcases. She stepped over Ivy's crayons scattered on the floor. On the counter, next to the sugar jar and my useless card, was a smaller card. Construction paper folded crooked, "Happy Anniversary Mommy" in Ivy's fat pencil letters, a drawing of 4 stick people holding hands. Ivy had made it the night before. She'd wanted to give it to Mommy in the morning. Bianca glanced at it. She set it back down, face up, like junk mail. Milo followed her toward the door. Mommy, where are you going?" And she stopped. She did stop, I'll give her that. And she looked back at the 2 of them, our whole life standing in the hallway in pajamas. And she said it to Preston, but loud enough, plenty loud enough, for both kids to hear. "They'll only slow me down." Then she walked out to his car. I didn't chase her. People ask me that later, the ones who hear the story. Why didn't you go after her? Why didn't you say something? Because Ivy had started to cry the silent way, the way that scares you more than screaming. And Milo had gone very still and very grown up. And I understood in that kitchen that whatever I did in the next 10 seconds, my kids would remember it for the rest of their lives. So I put the spatula down. I crouched. I opened my arms. Hey, come here, both of you." And I held them while the black car pulled away from the curb and turned at the stop sign and was gone. The pancakes burned. I remember that. The smoke alarm went off, and Ivy laughed through her tears at the noise, this hiccuping little laugh. And I flapped a dish towel at the ceiling and thought, absurdly, "We're okay. Look, she's laughing. We're okay." We were not okay, but we were still standing in our own kitchen, and she was in someone else's car. And I had already decided the only thing I got to decide that morning. I would stay. I made a new batch of pancakes. We ate them at the table with the fourth chair empty. Milo didn't talk. Ivy asked twice when Mommy was coming home, and I told her the truth in the only size a 5-year-old can hold it. Mommy went to live somewhere else, sweetheart. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here. She thought about that. She reached over and put Biscuit on the empty chair so it wouldn't be lonely. I had to leave the table for a second after that. I stood in the pantry with the door mostly closed, and I pressed the heel of my hand against my mouth, and I let it out, one time quiet, so they wouldn't hear. Then I washed my face at the laundry sink and came back and asked Milo if he wanted the last pancake. He said, "Is Mom coming to my game Saturday?" I said, "I'll be there, front row, loud." That's the thing nobody tells you about being left. It's not one big moment. It's 1,000 small ones, each with a kid's face turned up to you, waiting to see what kind of ground they're standing on. My sister Lena came over that night. She's 2 years older than me, blunt as a hammer, the only person I called. She walked in, took one look at the burned pan still in the sink and the anniversary card still against the sugar jar, and she didn't say, "I told you so," though she'd had her doubts about Bianca for years and I'd waved them off. She said, "Where are the kids?" "Asleep, finally," she said. "And you?" And I said, "I'm fine." And she looked at me the way she'd looked at me since we were little, the look that said she could see straight through the drywall of me. And she put the kettle on and stayed until 2 in the morning. Here's the thing about Bianca I need you to understand, because otherwise she's just a monster in a coat. And she wasn't. Not exactly. I met her in college. She grew up with nothing. Less than nothing. Her father left when she was 7, left them with debt and a landlord who changed the locks, and her mother, Diane, raised her on the idea that love is a luxury and money is oxygen. Diane used to say it right in front of me at Thanksgiving. Romance is what poor people do instead of planning. Bianca spent her whole life afraid of the bottom. When we were young and broke and in love, she used to lie in my dorm bed and ask, "But we won't always be poor, right? Promise me." And I'd promise. I meant it the way you mean things at 22. Then we got married, and I became a teacher, which is a job you take because you love it, not because it pays. And the years went by, and I coached, and I ran the science fair, and I was, by every measure that matters to a 4th grader, a rich man. And by the only measure that mattered to Bianca, I was proof that her mother had been right. I didn't see how bad it had gotten. That's my honest confession. I was so busy being content that I mistook her silence for peace. She'd stopped asking me to promise. I thought that meant she believed me. It meant she'd stopped believing me. Preston Vale came into the salon for a haircut in the spring. That's all I ever learned about how it started. A haircut and a man who owned 3 buildings downtown, and a woman who'd been waiting her whole life for exactly that car to pull up at exactly that curb. 2 weeks after she left, I got a call from a lawyer's office. Not mine, hers. A woman with a warm phone voice told me Bianca wanted to resolve things quickly and amicably. And could I come in Thursday? I went in Thursday. I sat across a shiny table from a lawyer whose watch matched Preston's, and I learned what amicably meant when a man like that is paying for it. Bianca wanted a fast divorce. She wanted no alimony from me. She didn't need it now, did she? And she wanted, in writing, full physical custody of Milo and Ivy to go to me. Full custody. To me. She was signing them over the way you sign over a couch you don't want to move. The lawyer slid the papers across. Mrs. Vale believes the children are best served by stability and by remaining in the family home with their father. Mrs. Vale. She'd already taken his name. The ink on our marriage wasn't even dry. I should have felt like I'd won. I had the house, the kids, no fight. Every man who's been through a custody war would trade places with me in a heartbeat. But I sat there holding a pen, and all I could think was, she's not even going to make them ask her to stay. I signed. Of course I signed. I'd have signed in blood to keep them safe with me. My own lawyer, a tired, decent man named Grady Sullivan, who took my case for a discount because his kid was in my chemistry class, read the final decree over the phone to me the day it was entered. Full physical custody to the father. Reasonable visitation to the mother, at the mother's initiative. At the mother's initiative, meaning she had to be the one to reach out. Meaning the ball, all of it, was in her court. I asked Grady, "So that's it? It's done?" And he was quiet a second. The way lawyers are quiet when they're deciding how much reality to hand you. It's done, he said. For now. But Chase, I want you to hear this once and then not lose sleep over it. Custody's never carved in stone. Circumstances change. If her life changes, if she gets stable, gets a big house, decides she wants to be a mother again, 2 years, 3 years down the road, she can walk into a courtroom and ask a judge to change everything. And some judges, they hear the word mother, and they lean. I said, she left them, Grady. She said they'd slow her down. In front of them. I know, he said, but she said it in a kitchen, not on a witness stand, and a kitchen doesn't keep records. I hung up and stood in that kitchen, the same one, and I looked at the empty 4th chair where Ivy still sometimes sat her rabbit, and for the first time since the black car pulled away, I felt something colder than grief. I felt the future coming. Before I take you into it, let me say one thing to you, wherever you're sitting right now. If this is already hitting somewhere tender, if you know what it is to be the one who stays, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe so this finds the other people who stayed. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I read every single one. It helps to know the porch lights are on all over the world tonight. Now let me tell you what 2 years can build and what one letter can threaten. The first year, I learned how to do a French braid off a YouTube video at 11 at night. Ivy had long hair, and Bianca had always done it. And the first day of kindergarten, Ivy stood in front of the bathroom mirror with her chin trembling because Daddy does it wrong and everyone will see. So I stayed up. I practiced on a mop. I gave myself a crash course in a thing I'd never once thought about. And in the morning, I did a braid that was crooked but held. And Ivy turned her head side to side in the mirror and said, "It's not wrong," which from a 5-year-old is a standing ovation. That's what the rebuild was, not a montage. 1,000 small competences, learned too late and just in time. I learned which nights Milo needed me to sit outside his door and pretend I wasn't listening to him cry. I learned that Ivy's stomach aches weren't stomach aches. I learned to keep a calendar on the side of the fridge, a big paper one, a square for every day. Because with one parent, if it isn't written down, it doesn't happen. Dentist, picture day, Milo's game, Ivy's recital, field trip money due. I wrote it all in block letters, and the kids started checking it every morning like a departure board, and it became, without my planning it, the center of the house. The thing that proved we were still a family with a schedule and a future. Somebody who plans, Diane would have said. Turns out I could plan just fine. I just planned for them instead of away from them. I want to be careful here because I know how this can sound. I'm not telling you I was a saint. I lost my temper. I burned dinners. I forgot Milo's inhaler once and had to turn the car around on the highway with my heart in my throat. There were nights I sat in the driveway after the kids were asleep and couldn't make myself go inside because inside was so quiet. And quiet was the sound she'd left behind. But I stayed. Every single morning I stayed. And slowly the way a bone knits, ugly and itchy and stronger at the break, we healed. We had help. That's the part the internet leaves out of the single dad story, the lone hero version. I wasn't a lone hero. Lena came Sundays and did the girl things I couldn't, and the aunt things nobody else could. My neighbor, Walt Bennett, a widower 2 doors down, taught Milo to ride a 2-wheeler in the cul-de-sac while I made dinner, and he never once made me feel like charity. The kid's pediatrician, Dr. Renner, a woman who'd been seeing them since Milo's first ear infection, started scheduling their checkups for late afternoons so I wouldn't have to take a personal day. The school counselor, Ms. Hartley, put both kids in a group she ran for children going through family changes, and she called me every few weeks with the plain, kind honesty of a person who has seen it all. Milo's angry chase, that's right on schedule. Ivy's too quiet. Watch that, but they're okay. You're doing it. You're doing the thing. Remember these people. Every one of them was watching. Not to judge me, to help me. And people who watch, remember, someday, in a room I couldn't yet imagine, being watched all those years was going to be the thing that saved us. As for Bianca, the world she'd driven off to came to me in pieces, whether I wanted it or not. You can't fully leave a town like ours. Preston's condominium project was downtown, 4 blocks from the diner where Milo liked pancakes on Saturdays. Bianca's face went up on a billboard for a while, of all things, the two of them at a charity gala. The Veil Foundation, her in a gown the color of money, laughing at something out of frame. Milo saw it from the car. He didn't say anything. He just looked out the other window the rest of the way home, and I wanted to climb up that billboard with a knife. Diane, her mother, called me exactly twice that first year. The first time to tell me Bianca was finally getting the life she deserves, and that I shouldn't poison the children against her. The second time to ask if I'd let the kids come to Bianca's new place for Christmas. Preston had a house on the water. There'd be a boat. Wouldn't that be nice for them? I said Bianca was welcome to see the kids any time she initiated, on their turf, at their pace, per the agreement. Diane called me small. Then she called me a name I won't repeat with kids maybe listening. Then she hung up. Bianca herself reached out maybe 4 times in 20 months. A birthday text to Milo, 8 words. A card to Ivy with a $100 bill that Ivy didn't understand, and I quietly put in a savings account. One video call at Christmas from that house on the water, a fire crackling behind her, Preston's voice off screen saying they'd be late, where she asked the kids if they'd seen the boat in the photos, and Milo said, "We have a game," and hung up. At the mother's initiative, she initiated the way you water a plant you're bored of, just enough to tell yourself it's not dead. And you know what? I let it be. I never poisoned a thing. When the kids asked about her, I told them the softest true version I could carry. Mommy loves you in her own way. Mommy has a hard time staying. I didn't tell them the 4 words. I didn't have to. Milo had heard them. Milo remembered everyone. He'd built a wall out of them, brick by brick. And I spent 2 years learning I couldn't tear that wall down for him. I could only make sure the house around it was warm. By the second summer, we were something like happy. That's the truth that makes the rest of it hurt. We'd made it to the far side. Ivy was 7 and reading chapter books out loud in the car. Milo was 10 and had made the travel soccer team. And there was a girl in his class he pretended not to like. I'd been named Teacher of the Year at the district level. A plaque, a photo in the local paper. The kids insufferably proud. We had Sunday dinners with Lena and Wednesday bike rides with Walt. The 4th chair at the table wasn't empty anymore. It was just where Milo did his homework. I thought we'd made it. I want you to know that so you understand the ground we were standing on when it opened up. It came in the mail. Of course it did. The big things always come in the small ways. A certified letter. I had to sign for it, standing in the doorway in my socks while the mail carrier waited. Heavy cream envelope. A law firm's name embossed in the corner. A firm downtown, the kind with a floor in a building. And I recognized the building because Preston Vale had built it. I opened it at the kitchen table after the kids were in bed. I read it 3 times. It was a notice. Bianca Vale, she'd kept his name even now, was petitioning the court to modify the custody arrangement. She was seeking joint legal and physical custody of Milo and Ivy, with a graduated transition to primary residential custody over the following year. Primary residential custody, she wanted them back. She wanted, on paper, to have them live with her. The letter said her circumstances had materially and substantially changed. It said she could now provide a stable, enriched, and financially secure environment. It said, and I read this line so many times the words came apart, that the current arrangement was the product of a vulnerable period in the petitioner's life and no longer reflected the best interests of the minor children. A vulnerable period. That's what they were calling the morning she stepped over Ivy's crayons. I sat in that kitchen with the calendar glowing on the fridge in the streetlight. Milo's game Saturday, Ivy's dentist Tuesday, all of it in my block letters. And I felt the 2 years fold up like they'd never happened. I felt 8 in the morning, spatula in hand, all over again. Only this time she wasn't taking a car to the curb. This time she was coming for the kids. I called Grady Sullivan the next morning before school, standing in my classroom with the lights off and the letter shaking a little in my hand. I read it to him. He was quiet for a while, the way he'd been quiet 2 years before. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, don't panic. This is a fight, not a done deal. But Chase, I need you clear-eyed. She's got money now. That means she's got a firm that does this for sport. And she's got the one thing money buys in family court that nothing else does. She can look, on paper, like the more comfortable option. Bigger house, no job stress, a yard on the water, and you're a teacher in a split level with a mortgage." I said, "I'm the one who stayed." "I know," he said. "And that matters. It matters more than you think, if we do this right. but it's not automatic. A judge is going to appoint someone, a guardian ad litem, a neutral investigator, works only for the kids, and that person is going to walk through your life with a clipboard, your house, your schedule, your temper, and they're going to interview the kids. And whatever those kids say, coached or not, it's going in a report the judge will lean on hard, coached or not. I hadn't even thought of that yet. I would learn. I asked him the only question that mattered. Can she win? Grady didn't lie to me. I'll always love him for that. She can, he said. People who abandon their kids come back and win custody more often than you'd ever believe if they show up rich and rehearsed and the other parent shows up angry. So here's rule 1, and it's the only rule for the next 6 months. You are not angry. You are calm. You are the stable one in every room, on every day, especially the days you want to put your fist through a wall. Can you do that? I looked at the calendar. Milo's game Saturday. Front row, loud. I've been doing it for 2 years, I said. I can do it a while longer. I want to stop here and ask you something, because I genuinely don't know what I'd have wanted a stranger to say to me that night. If you were in my kitchen, if you just signed for that letter, what would you have done? Fought with everything, or tried to keep it civil for the kids' sake? Comment your gut answer before I tell you what I chose. Most people, I've learned, are surer of the answer than I was. Because here's what I didn't know yet. Standing in that dark classroom, I didn't know why she'd really come back. I assumed it was guilt or love or some late-blooming motherhood. I assumed it was about the kids. It wasn't about the kids at all. And the day I found out what it was actually about was the day this whole thing turned. The guardian ad litem was a woman named Ruth Donnelly, and the first thing she did was tell me she wasn't on my side. I want to be clear with you, Mr. Meade, she said, sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad declining the coffee I offered. I don't work for you, and I don't work for Ms. Vale. I work for Milo and Ivy. My only question, the only one, is what's best for them. Sometimes that's an answer nobody in the case wanted to hear. Do you understand? I said I did. I meant it. Because here's the thing. If I'd truly believed the kids were better off in a house on the water, I'd have driven them there myself. What I believed was that they were better off with the parent who'd never once looked at their faces and done the math. But you can't say that to a guardian ad litem. You can't say anything that sounds like a weapon. Grady had drilled it into me. She'll ask you about Bianca. Do not swing. Every time you attack the mother, you look like the alienator. Answer about the kids, only ever about the kids. So Ruth Donnelly walked through my life with her clipboard, exactly like Grady said she would. She looked in the fridge. She looked in the kids' rooms. She noted the calendar on the fridge and stood in front of it for a long moment, reading 2 years of block letters, dentist and game and recital and field trip money due. And she didn't say anything, but she wrote something down, and I let myself hope it was the right thing. She asked about my temper. I told her the truth. I lost it the day I forgot Milo's inhaler. I yelled at myself the whole way back down the highway. I've never raised a hand to either of them, and I've raised my voice maybe a dozen times in 2 years, and every time I apologized after, because I want them to know that's what you do when you're wrong. You come back and you own it. She asked, gently, if I'd ever spoken badly about their mother to them. And I told her about the softest true version. Mommy loves you in her own way. Mommy has a hard time staying. I told her I'd never told them the thing their mother said on her way out the door, even though the older one heard it, because a boy shouldn't have to carry his mother's worst sentence, and I wasn't going to hand it back to him. Ruth Donnelly looked up from her pad at that, just for a second. Something moved behind her eyes, and then it was gone. Professional again. What did she say? She asked. On her way out. And I made a decision that Grady would have had a stroke over if he'd been in the room. I said, ask Milo. If he wants to tell you, he'll tell you. It's his, not mine. Then she interviewed the kids alone, with me in another room, with my hands pressed flat on my knees so they wouldn't shake. I don't know everything they said. Some of it Ruth told me later. Some of it I'll never know, and that's how it should be. But I know Ivy showed her Biscuit and explained, in the enormous serious way of a 7-year-old, that Biscuit had been sad for a long time, but was better now. And I know Milo, my angry, walled-up boy, sat across from a stranger and, when she asked him about the morning his mom left, told her all 4 words, unprompted, word for word. then told her he didn't want to live on a boat, then asked her point blank if she was going to make him. Ruth Donnelly, a woman paid to be neutral, told me later that she had to take a walk after that interview before she could drive. I thought that meant we were winning. I was about to learn how these things really go. The deposition was in a conference room downtown on a floor of the building Preston built, which I found out later was not a coincidence. Bianca's firm rented there. I sat across a long table from my wife for the first time in 2 years. She looked incredible. I'll just say it, money looks good on people. That's the ugly little secret nobody admits. She looked rested and expensive and 10 years younger than the woman who used to cry about the electric bill in my dorm bed. And when her lawyer, a smooth man named Ostrander with cufflinks, laid out her story, she nodded along like it was a script she'd finally learned by heart. Here was the story. Are you ready for it? Because it's a good one. It almost made me doubt my own memory. And I was there. The story was that Bianca had left during a severe mental health crisis, that she'd been isolated and controlled in our marriage, that I'd made her feel small, kept her from her potential, resented her wanting more, that she'd fled in a state of collapse and had spent 2 years getting healthy and building the stability she was never allowed, and that ever since I had systematically alienated the children from her, refusing visits, poisoning them, weaponizing their love. Every visit she'd never initiated was now a visit I'd denied. Every phone call she'd cut short was now a call I'd sabotaged. The birthday text, the Christmas video from the boat, reframed in Ostrander's telling as a desperate mother clawing at a wall I'd built. "Isn't it true, Mr. Meade," Ostrander said, "that you never once drove the children to see their mother?" "The agreement was at her initiative," I said. "She knew where we lived. She had the same house, the same phone number for 2 years. Isn't it true that you told the children their mother has a hard time staying, that you characterized her as unreliable?" "I told them she loved them and had a hard time staying. Both of those are true." "Isn't it true you kept a stuffed rabbit as a shrine to the abandonment to keep the wound fresh for your daughter?" I looked at him. I actually laughed, one breath, before I caught it. "It's a rabbit she's had since she was born," I said. "She sleeps with it. You want me to take it away from her to prove I'm not bitter?" It went on for 3 hours. I stayed calm. I kept my answers on Milo and Ivy and nothing else. Twice. She almost looked at me across the table, the old her flickering up like a fish under ice, and both times Ostrander touched her arm and she went back to her script. The worst part wasn't the lies. The worst part was that they were good lies. They had a shape. A jury of one tired judge could believe them because they fit the story people like to tell. The poor trapped wife, the controlling husband, the redemption. That's a story with a billboard. Mine was just a calendar on a fridge. I drove home shaking, not from anger, from the vertigo of watching 2 years of your life get repainted while you sit there and take it. Then it got worse because the court entered a temporary order. Pending the hearing, the judge granted Bianca supervised visitation, stepping up to unsupervised day visits every other weekend. Standard, my lawyer said. Courts favor contact. It doesn't mean anything about the outcome, but it meant something to my kids. The first unsupervised Saturday, she took them to Preston's house on the water. She sent a car, an actual car with an actual driver, because God forbid she pick them up herself. And Milo stood in our doorway in his cleats, because it was a game day, and looked at me, and I had to tell my 10-year-old that a judge said he had to go, that I couldn't fix this one, that I'd be right here when he got back. He didn't cry. He just picked up his bag and said, "I'll miss my game," and got in the car. Ivy came home from that weekend quiet in the wrong way, the old quiet, the stomachache quiet. She put Biscuit back on the empty chair at dinner, a thing she hadn't done in over a year, and when I asked her about the boat, she said, "It was big," in a small, flat voice, and then she said, "There's a lady at the house, not Mommy, a lady who does the cooking. Mommy was on her phone." And then she said the thing that I carried around like a stone for weeks. "Daddy, do we have to go live there? I don't want to, but Milo says we don't get to want." We don't get to want. My 10-year-old had already learned that, from the 4 words 2 years ago, and now from a black car and a judge's order. That night, after they were asleep, I did the thing I try never to do. I stood in the hallway between their 2 doors, Milo's with the do not enter sign, Ivy's with the nightlight, and I put my back against the wall and I slid down it and I sat on the floor of my own house. and I couldn't get up for a long time. The porch light clicked on outside, motion sensor, some cat or possum in the yard, throwing a bar of gold under the front door and across the floor to my feet. 2 years I'd left that light on, a house where the light's always on for you. And I sat there in the middle of it and thought, for the first and only time, what if staying wasn't enough? What if love loses to a boat? But I want to tell you about the day it turned, because it did turn, and it turned on a truth. And the truth came from the last place I'd have looked. It came from Preston. Grady called me on a Tuesday. I remember because it was Ivy's dentist. It was on the calendar, and his voice was different, careful, excited, and careful at once, the way you hold something that might be a gift or might be a bomb. "We deposed Preston Vale this morning," he said. "His lawyers fought it. We won. We got him for an hour. Chase, are you sitting down?" I wasn't. I sat. "He's leaving her," Grady said. "It's not final. It's not public, but it's happening. He's got a prenup. Ironclad. His last divorce taught him that. And here's the thing. I asked him, straight, why is your girlfriend suddenly fighting for 2 kids she signed away? And his own lawyer's trying to shut it down, and Preston, this guy, this arrogant guy who's never been told no in his life, he just waves him off. And he says it. On the record." "Says what?" I said. Grady read it to me. I've read the transcript so many times since that I could recite it in my sleep. The question, "Mr. Vale, are you aware why Miss Vale filed for custody of her children?" Preston's answer, "Look, I'll be honest, because I don't have a dog in this. Bianca and I are winding down. It's amicable. But she came to me a few months back, upset, saying the relationship felt shaky and she needed something that was hers, a project, something that made her look settled, rooted. She said, and I remember this, she said, a woman with her kids back is a woman people forgive. I told her, whatever makes you feel secure, sweetheart. I didn't think it'd turn into a whole this. A project, something that made her look settled. A woman with her kids back is a woman people forgive. She didn't want them. She'd never wanted them. She wanted the picture of them. She wanted to walk back into the world she'd bought and have the world say, look, she's not the woman who left her babies. Look, she's a mother again. All is well. My children, my braided hair, chapter book, travel soccer children were a set piece, a reputation repair, a prop to make Preston Vale's discarded girlfriend look like someone worth keeping, or at least someone worth forgiving, on her way out the door of a life that was already ending. I hung up the phone and I stood in my kitchen, and I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest with you about that. I felt sick, because 2 years ago she'd looked at their faces and called them a weight, and now, when it suited her, she'd looked at their faces and called them an asset. And not once in between had she looked at their faces and just seen Milo and Ivy. Then, under the sick, something else came up, cold and clear and steady, like the surface of the water after a stone goes all the way down. Now I knew what this was. And a fight, you understand, is a fight you can win. They thought this was about a bigger house. It was about the truth of who kept showing up. And the truth, it turned out, had a whole town of witnesses. I told Lena that night, at the kitchen table, after the kids were down. She listened to the whole thing. The deposition, Preston, a project, a woman people forgive. With her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Lena's never quiet. That's how I knew it had landed on her the way it landed on me. So they were never the point, she said finally. They were never the point. Not when she left. Not now. She set the mug down. Chase, I've been so angry at her for 2 years for not loving them enough to stay. And it turns out she doesn't love them enough to even want them. She loves what they do for her Instagram. She pressed her mouth flat. That's worse. I didn't know there was a worse, and there's a worse. I said, I don't want the kids to ever know this part. Not the boat, not the money, not any of it. Especially not why. She looked at me sharp. You've got the one thing that could win this. Her own boyfriend saying she's using them as a prop. And you're telling me you don't want the kids to hear it? I want the judge to hear it, I said. The kids are not a courtroom. If Milo grows up knowing his mother came back for a photograph, that doesn't free him. That's just a different weight. I'd be handing him a new sentence to carry so I could win an argument. I turned my glass in a slow circle on the table. I'll use the truth where it belongs. I'm not going to pour it on my son." Lena reached across and put her hand over mine and didn't say anything, which for Lena is a standing ovation too. I have to be honest with you though, because I promised you the floor and not the highlight reel. I almost broke that rule myself. Once. And it's the moment I'm least proud of in this whole thing, so of course it's the one I need you to hear. It was a bad night. A couple of weeks later, Milo came out of his room after another court-supervised phone call, and this time she'd really worked on him. The phone, the boat, his dad doesn't want him happy. And he stood in the doorway and threw it at me like a rock. "Mom says you're keeping me here because you're jealous, because she has money and you don't. She says you're just mad she's happy." And something in me, 2 years old and cornered and tired, reached for the truth like a weapon. I felt the words load up in my mouth. "She doesn't want you, Milo. She wants a picture of you." I heard her boyfriend say it. "You're a prop to her. It would have been so easy." It was even true, and it would have detonated my son's whole heart in exactly the shape she'd built it to break. I got as far as opening my mouth. I did. Then I looked at his face, furious and hoping, both at once, hoping I'd give him a reason to stop hurting. And I closed my mouth and I put the weapon down. "I'm not jealous, bud," I said instead. "And I'm not mad she's happy. I hope she's happy. I mean that." I crouched down. "I'm keeping you here because 2 years ago, a judge and your mom both agreed this is your home, and because you've got a game Saturday and a dentist Tuesday and a whole life with your name on it right here. That's it. That's the only reason. There's no jealous. There's just your dad who's not going anywhere. He didn't buy it all the way. 10-year-olds don't." But something in his shoulders came down half an inch, and that half inch was worth more than winning the argument. I've thought about that night 100 times since. How close I came. How the truth in the wrong hands, in the wrong room, does the villain's work for her. That's the thing. Nobody tells you about being the parent who stays. Staying isn't the hard part. The hard part is not becoming the kind of person who leaves marks on their way to being right. The rebuild kept going the whole time this legal thing hung over us. That's the strange doubleness of it. The world doesn't pause your regular life for your emergency. Milo's travel team made the county final. I want to tell you about that day, because it's a bright one, and because you'll understand later why it mattered so much that half the town was there. It was a Saturday in June, hot, the good kind of hot, and the whole cul-de-sac practically emptied out to the field. Walt came with a folding chair and a cooler. Lena brought Ivy, who wore Milo's number drawn on her cheek in marker, and screamed his name so loud she lost her voice by halftime. Coach put Milo at center back because Milo, it turns out, is the kid who doesn't leave his post. He plants himself between the danger and the goal, and he does not move. And I have wondered where a 10-year-old learns that. And I have decided not to wonder too hard. They won on penalties. Milo didn't take one. He's a defender. He'd tell you defenders don't need glory. But when the last kick went in, his teammates piled on him anyway. And I stood at the fence next to Walt Bennett and a dozen parents I'd known for years. And I clapped until my hands hurt. Front row, loud, exactly like I'd promised a heartbroken 8-year-old at a kitchen table 2 years before. Ivy climbed the fence and I let her, and she waved Biscuit over her head like a flag. That night, we got ice cream, the 3 of us, and Ivy fell asleep in the car with chocolate on her chin. And Milo, in the front seat now because he's 10 and it's a whole thing, looked out the window and said, "Quiet, not a fight this time." Mom wasn't there. "No," I said, "she wasn't. She's never there." I didn't say anything. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let a true sentence just be true and not rush to bandage it. Then Milo said, "You were always there," and looked back out the window, and I had to drive very carefully for a minute because the road had gone blurry. Half the people at that field would end up, one way or another, part of why we kept our home. Not because I recruited them, because they'd been there. Bianca had a foundation gala on a billboard. I had a county final penalty shootout with a cooler and a folding chair. It turns out juries of one prefer the folding chair. The pressure from the other side kept climbing, though, and it climbed in kind, exactly like Grady warned me it would. Diane came to the house that second week of June unannounced, a car with the driver idling at the curb. "I'd like to see my grandchildren," she said. They were at a friend's, and I told her the truth. Contact went through the counselor and the court now, not the porch. Her chin came up. You've turned into a small, vindictive little man, Chase. Bianca could have had the world and settled for you. Now that she's climbing out, you want to chain her down with guilt. I looked at the woman who taught my wife that love was a luxury and money was oxygen, and I let the old flare go by. The kids can see their grandmother, through the counselor, at their pace. That door's open, but I won't stand here and let you call showing up for 2 children every day the small version of a life. It's the only version that ever mattered. I held the door. Tell Bianca I hope she's well. Good night. I closed it gently. There's more power in a soft door than a slammed one, and went to start dinner because 2 kids were coming home who needed to eat. The last escalation before the hearing was the ugliest because it used my son as a stage. Bianca showed up at one of Milo's summer league games, unannounced, not on any schedule, not through any counselor, just there, in white, at the fence, with Preston's driver holding an enormous wrapped gift, a bicycle by the shape of it, tied with a bow. She'd picked a game because a game has an audience. She wanted the town to see the loving mother, cheering, arms open, the picture that a woman people forgive would need. Milo saw her from the field. I watched it happen. I watched my son, mid-game, spot his mother at the fence, and I watched him freeze. Full stop, dead still, the way he'd frozen in a hallway at 8. And then I watched him turn his back and jog to the far side of the field and stay there, as far from her as the game allowed, until the coach subbed him out because a kid who's shaking can't play defense. She called his name a few times, sweet, carrying, for the crowd. And here's the thing about a town that's watched you. Nobody moved toward her. The parents I'd stood beside for 2 years looked at this beautiful woman in white with her giant bow and her hired car, and then they looked at the boy shaking at the far fence. And they did the math she'd never once done. Somebody's mom, I don't even know whose, walked out to Milo with a water bottle and just stood next to him, a body between him and the fence, not saying anything. That's a small town. That's the folding chair beating the billboard in real time. I didn't make a scene. God, I wanted to. I walked over, calm, always calm, and I said low, just for her, Bianca, not like this. You're scaring him. If you want to see him, you know the way. This isn't it. And for 1 second the mask flickered, and she said, almost to herself, I just wanted them to see me trying. Them. The crowd. Not him. The crowd. Then she left, and the driver put the bicycle back in the trunk, and I never told Milo it had been for him. It went to a kid at the shelter through Lena later, and I hope he loved it, whoever he was, and I hope nobody ever told him where it came from. That night, Milo asked me if she was going to keep showing up at his games, and I gave him the only promise I could actually keep. I don't know, bud, but I'll always be there, even if she is, especially if she is. You look up, you'll find me. Front row, loud. He nodded and put himself to bed, and I sat up with Grady's list of witnesses and thought, they keep pushing because they're losing, and they don't even know it yet. I was wrong about one thing, though. I thought we were past the worst. I thought the worst was behind us. The bike, the fence, the frozen boy. I let myself for about a week believe the fight was basically won. Then the judge opened his mouth at a scheduling hearing, and I found out the worst was still in front of us. The worst thing in this whole story wore a robe and meant well. That's what made it the worst. Before that scheduling hearing, Grady sat me down in his cramped office with the diplomas going yellow on the wall and taught me the last cruel lesson of family court. Motive isn't everything, he said. I hate it too. Ostrander's going to stand up and say, so what? Plenty of people want good things for bad reasons. The question the judge answers isn't, is Bianca a good person? It's what's best for these 2 kids. And he'll argue a mother with a stable home and money is what's best. And that Preston's just a jilted boyfriend running his mouth. He'll turn our best card into sour grapes. I said, but she doesn't even want them. She said so. She said it to Preston. Preston's an interested witness with an axe. It helps us. It's not a knockout. He leaned forward. Here's what you're up against, and I'm only going to say it once. The judge on this is Judge Alden. Fair man, but old school. He's got a thing. You can find it in his rulings if you know where to look. about mothers. He believes in his gut that kids need their moms, and he leans that way when it's close. And Ostrander knows it, which is exactly why Bianca filed in this county. The world tilted a little, so it doesn't matter what's true. It matters, Grady said, but true doesn't win by sitting there being true. True has to get up and testify. We have to make it undeniable. We have to make it so the best interest of these kids is so obviously with you that even a judge who wants to hand them to their mother can't do it with a straight face. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, it got worse before the hearing, not better. At a status conference, a short hearing about scheduling, nothing supposed to happen, Ostrander stood up and asked the judge to expand Bianca's visitation again and to have Milo interviewed a second time, given the child's demonstrated desire for a relationship with his mother. And Judge Alden, this fair, old-school man, looked over his glasses and said the sentence that took the floor out from under me. "It's important," he said, "that these children have every opportunity to reconnect with their mother before this court makes a permanent decision. I'm inclined to encourage that reconnection. Mr. Meade, I'll expect your full cooperation." Inclined. There it was. The word Grady had warned me about 2 years ago in a different life. Some judges hear the word mother, and they lean. I watched a fair man lean right in front of me, and I understood that fair wasn't the same as ours. That night, Milo had a supervised phone call with Bianca. Court ordered, a caseworker on the line. He took it in his room with the door shut. When it was over, he came out and stood in the kitchen doorway, and something in his face had come loose. "Mom says if I live with her I can have a phone," he said. "A real one. And she says the boat's going to have my name on it. And she says..." His voice did a thing, went up and cracked, 10 years old. "She says you don't want me to be happy. She says that's why you won't let me come." And there it was, the oldest trick, and the cruelest. And it worked because he was a child, and she was his mother, and children are built to believe their mothers. I got down on my knees in the kitchen, so I was under him, looking up, the way you do with a spooked animal or a heartbroken kid. "Buddy," I said, "do you want to live on the boat?" He started to cry. I don't know. Stop making me pick." And that's when it broke in me. The calm I'd held for 2 years, the calm Grady told me to hold at all costs. It cracked, right there on the kitchen floor, and I didn't fight it, because Milo needed to see it more than he needed me to be a wall. "You don't have to pick," I said, and my voice wasn't steady, and I let it not be steady. "You hear me? That's the whole thing I've been trying to tell you for 2 years. It was never your job to pick. It was never your job to keep anybody. That was the grown-up's job, and one grown-up did it wrong, and none of it, was ever your fault." He fell into me, all 10 years and 40 pounds of him, and he cried the way he hadn't let himself cry since he was 8 in a hallway watching a black car. And I held him on the floor under the calendar, and the porch light clicked on outside, and I thought, I might lose this. I might actually lose this. That was the bottom. I want you to know I was down there, because everything I'm about to tell you, I want you to know it came from the floor of that kitchen, not from some man who was sure he'd win. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the table, and I did the only thing I know how to do when the ground goes out. I made a plan. I got out a legal pad, my calendar's plainer cousin, and I wrote down every person who had watched us for 2 years, not to build a case, to count my blessings, and then, somewhere around 3 a.m., I realized my blessings and my case were the same list. Dr. Renner, who'd seen Milo through 6 ear infections and Ivy through a broken wrist, and never once seen Bianca in her waiting room. Ms. Hartley, the counselor, who had 2 years of notes on 2 kids healing in real time under one steady roof. Walt Bennett, who taught my son to ride a bike and had watched from his porch, 2 doors down, the morning a black car took a mother away. Coach, Milo's soccer coach, who'd handed me the sign-up clipboard for 2 straight seasons and never met the mother. Lena, my sister, who'd been there Sundays, who'd been there the first night with the kettle, and the calendar itself, 2 years of block letters, not evidence of anything dramatic. Evidence of the least dramatic thing in the world, that somebody had shown up every single day, and written it down and done it. I called Grady at 6 in the morning. I read him the list. He was quiet, and then he said, "Chase, that's not a list of witnesses. That's a life. Ostrander's got a billboard and a boat. You've got a life with names in it. A pause. Get me every one of them. And get me the divorce decree, the original one where she asked, on the record, for you to have full custody, for the stability of the children. Her words, 2 years ago, under oath. I said, you want to use her own words against her. I want to use her own words, he said, period. Not a recording, not a trick. Just the plain things she signed her name to and the plain things a dozen honest people saw with their own eyes. Chase, we're not going to ambush anybody. We're going to walk into that courtroom and let the truth stand up one person at a time. And we're going to make it so tall that a judge who wants to look away can't. For the next 3 weeks, I lived 2 lives. In one, I was Mr. Mead, teacher, front row, loud braiding hair and signing field trip forms and keeping the porch light on. In the other, I was quietly asking a pediatrician and a counselor and a widower and a coach and my own sister whether they'd be willing to stand up in a courtroom and say what they'd seen. Not one of them hesitated. Not one. Dr. Renner said, I've been waiting 2 years for someone to ask me the right question about those kids. Walt Bennett, 72 years old, said, son, I'll put on the one suit I've got left, and I'll tell that judge exactly what I saw from my own front porch. Ms. Hartley, bound by all her professional cautions, said carefully, I can only testify to what's in my notes and what's in the children's best interest. But Chase, what's in my notes and what's in their best interest are the same thing. And the whole time, Bianca's side kept escalating, the way people do when they can smell that the wind's about to turn. Ostrander filed a motion to exclude Preston's testimony. Denied. He filed to expand visitation again. Bianca sent Ivy a phone in the mail, a 7-year-old, with a note that said, so we can talk anytime, love mommy, which I photographed and handed to Grady and otherwise put in a drawer, because a bribe to a child is a thing a courtroom should see, not a thing I was going to fight a 7-year-old about. The closer we got, the harder they pushed, and the harder they pushed, the clearer it got, even to me, even down on the floor where I'd been, that they were pushing because they were scared. You don't shove that hard on a door that's already open. They deposed me, too. My turn in the shiny conference room on Preston's floor, Ostrander across the table, and his whole job for 3 hours was to make me angry because an angry father is an alienating father, and an alienating father loses. He was good at it. He came at the calendar. Do you control every hour of these children's lives? Isn't that a lot of control? He came at my income. He came at the divorce. You must have hated her. At each one, I sat on my hands under the table, the way I'd sat on them the morning she left, and I kept my answers on the kids and nowhere else. The calendar's not control. With one parent, if it's not written down, a kid misses a dentist appointment. That's the job. We're not rich, but the light stays on. Everybody eats. Nobody's cold. I don't hate her. I've got 2 kids who look like her. Hating her would be a full-time job, and I've already got 2 of those. Then he came at the kids. Have you considered that your son's anger might be at you? And I felt the heat come up, and I let it come all the way up. And then I set it down on the table where he could see it was under my hand and not on my face. My son's anger, I said, is at the person who told him to his face that he'd slow her down. I've spent 2 years making sure he never once heard a word like that from me. If he's angry at me for anything, it's that I'm the one who's always there to be angry at. That's what the safe parent gets. You get to be the wall they punch because they know the wall won't leave. I'll take it. I'll take it every day. Ostrander looked at me for a second, and something in his face, professional, not kind, but honest, told me he knew he'd just gotten nothing. He ended the deposition 20 minutes early. I thought that was the turn. I let myself think it, driving home. And then, 2 days later, the thing happened that should have ended the whole case and instead nearly finished me. Preston left her, for real, and half public. It showed up in the kind of local gossip that travels a small town faster than any court filing. The Vail Foundation quietly took her name off the letterhead. The house on the water went up for sale. Someone saw her moving boxes into a rental. The billboard came down. The whole glittering world she'd traded her children for packed up and drove off exactly the way she'd packed up and driven off from us. And I want to tell you, I felt vindicated, and instead, I felt the ground move because I understood what it meant before Grady even called. It meant she had nothing left but this. "She's not dropping the case," Grady told me, flat that night. I thought she might. She's not. Chase. This just got more dangerous, not less. A woman fighting for a photograph? You can beat. A woman with nothing left, fighting because these kids are the last thing she can point to and say, "See, I'm not who you think." That woman fights to the wall. Preston leaving didn't take her motive away. It took away everything except her motive. That was the small false floor, if you're keeping track of the shape of these things. The moment the good news turned out to be bad news. I'd spent weeks thinking money was my enemy, and now the money was gone, and my enemy was worse. A desperate person with a courtroom and a judge who leaned toward mothers and nothing left to lose. I didn't sleep much that stretch, but life, that stubborn thing, kept handing me reasons to keep standing up. Ivy had her dance recital the week before the hearing. She'd been practicing for months. A little routine to a song about sunshine, 7 years old, third from the left in a line of small, serious dancers in yellow. I sat in a packed school auditorium between Lena and Walt Bennett, who'd put on his one suit for the second time that month. And I watched my daughter, who 2 years ago had put a stuffed rabbit on an empty chair so it wouldn't be lonely, count her steps under her breath, and hit every single one and then find my face in the crowd and beam like the sun the song was about. Her teachers were there. Her whole class was there. Half the parents who'd end up mattering were there. And afterward, in the lobby, with Ivy still in her yellow costume clutching a grocery store bouquet like it was roses from a stage door, 3 different teachers came up to tell me how far she'd come, how she used to be the quiet one who didn't raise her hand, how this year she'd bloomed. "Whatever you're doing at home," one of them said, "keep doing it." I said I would. I didn't tell her that in 8 days, a court would decide whether I got to. That's the doubleness I keep coming back to. The recital and the hearing. The same week, the same life. A yellow costume and a sealed report. You don't get to live one at a time. 3 days before the hearing, Ruth Donnelly, the guardian ad litem, the one person in the whole case who worked for nobody but Milo and Ivy, filed her report with the court, sealed. I wasn't allowed to read it. Grady wasn't allowed to read it. Only the judge, until we were all in the room. I'd let her into my house. I'd let her interview my kids. I'd told her to ask Milo about the 4 words instead of telling her myself. I'd done the one brave thing you can do in a custody case, which is trust the neutral person to actually be neutral. And now the results of that trust were locked in a file I couldn't open. And I lay awake every one of those 3 nights trying to read a document through a courthouse wall. The night before the hearing, I did the bedtime routine like any other night because the kids didn't know. I'd never told them there was a hearing, never told them their whole world was on a docket, and I'm still glad I didn't. I read Ivy 2 chapters. I told Milo his game was covered. Lena would take him if it ran long. I turned on the porch light. I checked the calendar on the fridge. Hearing wasn't on it. That square just said Milo. Away game, Ivy. Aunt Lena in my block letters, a normal Thursday for 2 kids who got to stay normal. Then I sat at the kitchen table in the dark with a stuffed rabbit that a 7-year-old had pressed into my hands that afternoon. "Take biscuit, Daddy, in case you get scared." And I didn't read a single tea leaf because there weren't any left to read. I'd shown up for 2 years. I'd stayed calm when I wanted to burn the world down. I'd put the weapon down the night I could have used it on my own son. I'd let a town watch me and trusted them to tell the truth. There was nothing left to do but stand up in the morning and find out whether all of that was enough, or whether enough was a thing money and a lien and a desperate woman could still take away. I still didn't know when I stood up the next morning and the bailiff said, "All rise." The courtroom was smaller than the ones on television, wood paneling, gray carpet, a flag, maybe 20 people in the gallery. Lena, Walt in his one suit, Dr. Renner, Ms. Hartley, Coach, a few teachers from my school who came on their own because word gets around a small town. On the other side, Bianca, in a suit the color of a dove, and Ostrander with his cufflinks. And behind them, for exactly 11 minutes before he slipped out and never came back, Preston Vale. The kids weren't there. Judges keep kids out of these rooms, thank God. But Ivy had made me take biscuit in case I got scared. I had a gray stuffed rabbit in my jacket pocket in a courtroom. That was the whole case, really, in one pocket. Bianca went first. Petitioner presents first. Her burden to prove things had changed. She was good. I need you to feel how close this was. Ostrander walked her through the story from the deposition, and she delivered it soft and sad and sorry, dabbing her eyes at the right moments. The crisis, the controlling marriage, the 2 years of healing, the stable home she could offer now, the children she'd never stopped loving from afar, kept from her by a bitter man. I made a terrible mistake, she said, looking right at Judge Alden. I was sick, and I was scared, and I ran. But I'm well now, and a boy needs his mother. A little girl needs her mother. I'm asking this court to let me be their mother again. I watched Judge Alden's face when she said a little girl needs her mother, and I watched him lean 1 degree toward her. I felt Grady go still beside me. We were losing. In that moment, we were losing. Then it was our turn, and Grady stood up, and he did not attack her. He did what he'd promised. He let the truth stand up, one person at a time. He called Dr. Renner first. She'd been the kid's pediatrician for a decade. Grady asked her simple things. How many well-child visits had Milo and Ivy had in the past 2 years? 14, she said between them. Who brought them? Their father. Every time. Had she ever, in 10 years, met their mother in her office? A pause. No, not once. Was there anything she wanted the court to know about these 2 children? And Dr. Renner turned to the judge and said, I've watched a lot of kids come through hard things. These 2 are thriving. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because somebody's there every day. That's not a medical opinion, but I've got 10 years of charts that are. Ostrander asked her 3 questions on cross and sat back down. There's nothing you can do with a woman holding 10 years of charts. That was wave 1. Watch what the water did. Grady called Ms. Hartley, the school counselor. She testified carefully, within her ethics, only to what she could. But what she could was enough. 2 children who'd entered her family changes group angry and shut down. 2 children who 2 years on were regulated, connected, and secure. She testified that in 2 years, the school had never once received contact from the children's mother. No call, no email, no request for a report card, nothing. Ostrander objected, overruled. And then Ms. Hartley said the thing that made Judge Alden write something down, slowly, in his own hand. In my professional opinion, the single greatest protective factor in these children's lives is the consistency of their home. Removing them from it would not be reconnecting them with a parent. It would be a second loss. A second loss. The judge wrote it down. Grady called Walt Bennett, 72 years old, in a suit that had last been worn to a funeral. My neighbor climbed into the witness box and put his hand on the book and told the plain truth of a summer morning 2 years back. He'd been on his porch with his coffee. He said the way he was every morning since his wife passed. He saw the black car. He saw the man with the silver hair go up the Meads' steps. He saw Bianca come out with her suitcases. And Grady asked gently, "Did you hear anything, Mr. Bennett?" And Walt looked, not at me, not at the judge, but at Bianca, kindly even, the way old men look at a young person who's ruined their own life. And he said, "I heard the boy ask where his mama was going, and I heard her say, 'Clear as this room, they'll only slow me down.' Then she got in the car." The gallery went quiet, not gasping quiet, worse. The quiet of 20 people who all just heard the same 4 words at once and understood, finally, exactly what kind of morning it had been. Bianca stared at the table. For the first time all day, she didn't dab her eyes. That was wave 2. And they thought that was the bottom of it. They always do. Grady called me. I'd been dreading it and wanting it for 3 weeks. He asked me about the calendar. I'd never expected to be asked about a calendar under oath, and I explained it. The block letters, the departure board, dentist, and game and recital, 2 years of a house that ran on somebody showing up. He asked me about the morning she left, and I told it flat and true, no adjectives, because Grady had taught me the truth doesn't need decorating, and I'd learned he was right. Then he asked me why I never told the children what their mother said, and that was the question that got me. That was the one I'd been able to answer to Ruth Donnelly across a kitchen table but couldn't quite answer in a wooden box with my ex-wife 8 feet away. "Because," I said, and I had to stop. And I let myself stop because Milo had needed to see me crack on the kitchen floor, and maybe this room needed to see it too. Because he already heard it. My son already carries the worst sentence anyone ever said to him, and it came from the one person who was never supposed to say it. I wasn't going to hand it back to him. My whole job for 2 years has been to make the house around that sentence warm enough that it doesn't freeze him solid. That's it. That's the whole job. I'm not trying to keep them from their mother. I'm trying to keep them from being weightless again. Judge Alden was not leaning anymore. He was very still. On cross, Ostrander tried. I'll give him that. He asked if I was bitter. I said I'd been heartbroken and then I'd been busy. He asked if I'd denied Bianca contact. I said she had 2 years, 1 address, 1 phone number, and a standing invitation to show up, and she'd used it to send a 7-year-old a cell phone in the mail. He asked, sneering a little now, whether I really believed a school teacher's split level was better for these children than everything Ms. Vale could provide. And I said the only thing I had. I believe kids need somewhere the light's always on for them. We can afford the light. We've kept it on for 2 years. I'll keep it on for 10 more. Grady sat down, but he was a long way from done because a truth this tall gets built one person at a time, and he had a few more people to stand up. He called Milo's coach. 2 questions, really. How long had he coached Milo? 2 seasons. In 2 seasons, how many times had he met the boy's mother? Coach thought about it, honestly, the way you do when the answer surprises even you. Never, he said. I've handed that sign-up clipboard to his dad 4 times. I wouldn't know his mom if she walked in right now. She was sitting 15 feet away. He genuinely didn't know her. The gallery felt that land. He called my sister. Lena took the stand and did the thing she does, which is tell the truth with the bark still on it. She told the court about the first night. The burned pan, the kettle, 2 in the morning. She told them about 2 years of Sundays, the girl things and the aunt things, and how in 2 years the only time Bianca had entered that house was in the divorce photos. Ostrander tried to paint her as biased. My own sister, of course she'd say that. And Lena looked at him and said, sure, I'm biased. I'm biased toward the 2 kids I've watched get put back together with 2 hands and a paper calendar. You want to call that bias, mister? You go right ahead. Then Grady called the last witness before the documents, and this was the one that even I hadn't heard yet, because her report had been sealed until that morning. Ruth Donnelly, the guardian ad litem, the one person in the entire case who worked for nobody but Milo and Ivy. She took the stand with her file, and she was exactly as neutral on the record as she'd been in my kitchen. She praised nothing. She attacked no one. She just laid it out. She'd interviewed both parents. She'd interviewed the children separately, more than once. She'd spoken to the pediatrician, the counselor, the school. And her recommendation, entered into the record of that court, was this: that primary physical custody remain with the father, or his father, that the children's expressed wishes, their stability, and their demonstrated well-being all pointed the same direction. And, she read this part slowly, and I watched Judge Alden follow every word, that, given the petitioner's history of sustained absence, the paramount risk to these children is not insufficient contact with their mother, but the trauma of a second disruption should a reintroduced parent again withdraw. A second disruption. The court's own investigator had looked at everything and used almost the same word, Ms. Hartley had a second loss. Ostrander had nothing for her. You can't cross-examine the person the court appointed precisely so that nobody could buy her. He asked whether children generally benefit from knowing their mothers. Generally, Ruth Donnelly said, when the mother is safe and consistent. My job isn't the general child. It's these 2. And she nodded at the file and stepped down, and I understood that the lean I'd watched tilt toward Bianca an hour ago had just met the one weight in the room that money hadn't touched and couldn't. Then Grady stood up one more time because he'd saved for last the 2 things that broke the whole case open. Your Honor, he said, the petitioner has told this court her return is about the children. I'd like to read 2 things into the record. The petitioner's own words, both under oath. Both, I'll note, entirely her own. No recordings, no surprises, just what she herself has already said. The first was the original divorce decree. Grady read the line where Bianca had petitioned 2 years ago for full physical custody to be granted to me, her words in the filing, for the stability and continuity of the minor children, whose best interests are served by remaining in the family home with their father. Her own words, 2 years ago. The children's best interests are served by remaining with their father. Or, she'd sworn to it to get out clean. The second was Preston Vale's deposition. Grady read it into the record in a flat, unhurried voice, and he didn't editorialize. He didn't have to. The question and then Preston's answer. She said she needed something that was hers, a project, something that made her look settled. And then the line that landed in that courtroom like a dropped plate. She said, "A woman with her kids back is a woman people forgive." A project, a woman people forgive. The silence after that one had a floor and walls. I could hear the flag rope tapping the pole outside the window. Ostrander was on his feet objecting. Interested witness, hearsay, prejudicial. And Judge Alden let him finish and then said quietly, "I'll allow it. Sit down, counselor." And Ostrander sat down, and I knew, and Grady knew, and I think even Bianca knew, that the wind had finished turning. But it wasn't Grady who ended it. Grady was too smart to end it. He knew the oldest rule of these things. The antagonist has to hang herself. So he asked Bianca one question on cross, one, and then he let her keep talking, because she couldn't not. He asked, mild as milk, "Ms. Vale, 2 years ago you swore the children's best interests were served by living with their father. What changed about the children? Not about you, about the children." And Bianca, expensive, rehearsed, so close to winning an hour before. Bianca made the mistake that people who lie for a living make when someone finally asks them the plain question. She got angry. The mask didn't slip. It came off in her hand. "Nothing changed about the children," she snapped. "That's the whole... They're fine. They're obviously fine. He's made them fine. Congratulations. What changed is me. I have a real life now. I can give them things he can't even pronounce. Do you know what it's like to sit across from people at dinner and have them know you as the woman who..." And she caught herself, 1 second too late, the whole room already leaning in. "I earned a second chance," she finished, lower. "I'm allowed to want my life to look like something. I want my life to look like something. Not I want my children. I want my life to look like something." She'd said it. In the end, nobody made her say it. Nobody tricked her. She said it herself, the same way she'd said 4 words in a kitchen, because that's who she was in the places where she thought it counted. Judge Alden looked at her over his glasses for a long moment, and something in his old-school face closed like a door, and I understood that the lean was gone, and it wasn't coming back. Before I tell you how it ended, let me say one thing to you, because you've stayed with me this whole way, and I think you might need to hear it as much as I did. If you've ever been the one who stayed, if you kept the light on for people who left, if you did the small, unglamorous thing 10,000 times while somebody else got the billboard, I want you to know that it counts. It counts even when no judge is watching. It counts most then. And if this is landing somewhere real for you tonight, take a second and share it with the person in your life who stayed, the one nobody gave a plaque to. Let them know you saw it. Judge Alden did not take it under advisement. Some judges make you wait weeks. He didn't. He set down his pen and he spoke from the bench, and I gripped a stuffed rabbit in my pocket like a 40-pound kid was hanging off my neck. He said the legal words first, and I'll spare you most of them. Material change in circumstances, best interests of the minor children. The moving party bears the burden. Then he set the legal words down and talked like a man. A parent's improved finances, he said, are not a reason to uproot 2 children from the only stable home they have ever really known. This court has heard from a pediatrician, a counselor, a neighbor, and a court-appointed guardian a single consistent account. These children are safe, secure, and thriving. And they are so because of the sustained daily care of their father. The court has also heard from the petitioner's own sworn words 2 years ago and again today a great deal about what the petitioner wants her life to look like and remarkably little about what these children need. He looked at Bianca then, not unkindly. "Ms. Vale, the door to your children is not closed. This court will never close it, but it does not swing wide because you have decided on your timeline that you are ready. It opens at their pace with a therapist, supervised, and it stays open only as long as you keep showing up, which, this court notes, is a thing you have not yet once done." Then he ruled. The petition to modify custody was denied. Full physical custody remained with me. Bianca was granted therapeutic supervised visitation to expand only on the recommendation of the children's counselor and the guardian ad litem, and only, the judge said, at the children's initiative and comfort, not the parents' convenience. At the children's initiative, he'd flipped her own 2-year-old trick and handed it to the kids. The gavel, that small wooden sound. Walt Bennett, 72, let out a breath in the gallery that everybody heard, and Lena grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise, and Dr. Renner closed her eyes, and I sat there with my hand around a rabbit's chewed ear, and I did not feel like a winner. I felt like a father whose kids got to keep their house. Bianca didn't look at me as she left. She looked at the floor, and for 1 second, as she passed our table, her step hitched, and her eyes went to my jacket pocket where a bit of gray fur was showing. Ivy's rabbit, and I watched something cross her face that I choose to believe was real. Grief, maybe. Not for losing. For what she'd have had to become to win. And hadn't. Then Ostrander touched her elbow, and she went out the doors into the world she'd bought. And they closed behind her. It was over. Except it wasn't quite. Because 2 weeks later, she came to the porch. The kids never knew there was a hearing. That's the part I'm proudest of. To Milo and Ivy, that Thursday was an away game, and an afternoon at Aunt Lena's. And they came home to spaghetti, and a dad who hugged them a little too long and blamed it on missing them. The court set up therapeutic visits, supervised, at the kids' pace, a counselor in the room, exactly what the judge ordered. And here's the thing that told me the judge had been righter than even he knew. Bianca didn't come to the first one, or the second. The counselor called twice to reschedule, and twice something came up. The door the court had held open, the door I'd promised I'd never close. She couldn't quite walk through because it turned out that when there was no billboard behind it, no photograph in it for her, no life to make look like something, the door to her own children wasn't worth the drive. Diane called me one last time, cold, clipped. She said I'd won, like it was a game, like there'd been a trophy. I told her the kid's grandmother was still welcome, through the counselor, whenever she wanted. She said she'd think about it. She never called back. Some people would rather be right about the world than be in their grandchildren's lives, and there's no court order for that. Then, 2 weeks after the hearing, on an ordinary evening, someone knocked on the porch. I knew before I opened it, I don't know how. Ivy was doing homework at the kitchen table under the calendar. Milo was in the yard. The porch light had clicked on in the dusk, that same motion sensor gold, and through the little window in the door, I saw her standing in it. No suitcases this time. No car at the curb, no man, just Bianca alone in the porch light on the same board she'd walked away across 2 years before. I opened the door. She looked older than she had in the courtroom, tired in a way money can't fix. She had her hands pressed together in front of her like she was praying, or cold. "Chase," she said, and then it came out of her in a rush, the way things do when someone's rehearsed them and is terrified they'll lose their nerve. I made a mistake, the biggest. I know that now. I lost everything, and I deserve to. I know I did, but I keep thinking about that kitchen, about the pancakes, about who we were, and I want to come home. I want my family back. I'll do anything. I'll go to the counselor. I'll do the visits. Please let me come home. Let me be their mom again. Let me be your wife again. And I want to tell you I didn't hesitate, but I promised you the floor and not the highlight reel, so here's the truth. I hesitated. For just a second, I was 22 again, and she was in my dorm bed asking me to promise her we wouldn't always be poor. And I was promising. And I meant it with everything I had. For 1 second, I loved the girl she used to be so much that my hand almost reached for her the way it would have 100 years ago. Then I heard Ivy inside ask nobody in particular how to spell because. And I heard Milo's ball thump against the fence in the yard, and the second passed, the way that morning's 10 seconds had passed, and I knew exactly what kind of ground my kids were standing on, because I'd spent 2 years building it under their feet. "Bianca," I said, gently. I'd learned there's more power in a gentle voice than a loud one. "I hope you're okay. I mean that. Not as a line, I really mean it. And I'm not angry anymore. I used to be. I'm not." Her face lifted just a little. Hoping. "But you don't get to come home," I said, "because this isn't the home you left. You left a marriage that I could maybe have forgiven. People fall out of love. It happens. It's sad. It's not a crime." I took a breath. "But you didn't just leave me. You looked at their faces, Milo's, Ivy's, right here in this doorway, and you called them a thing that would slow you down. And then for 2 years, you were the phone call that never came. And 2 weeks ago, you couldn't even drive across town to sit in a room with them for an hour because there was nothing in it for you but them. She started to cry. I didn't stop. The court left a door open for you, and I will never close it because it's theirs, not mine. If you want to know your kids, it's there. The counselor's number hasn't changed, but you have to walk through it for them. Not for a photograph, not to make your life look like something. For them on their timeline showing up over and over until they believe it. The boring way, the daily way, the way that doesn't come with a billboard. I looked at her, and I said the truest thing I had. That's the only version that was ever real. It's the version you called slowing you down, and it's the only one I'll ever open this door for. She stood there in this porch light with her hands still pressed together, and she understood, I think, that I wasn't punishing her, that there was no revenge in it, that the kids and I had simply built a life while she was gone, and there wasn't a door back into who we used to be because we weren't those people anymore. We were better, and it had cost us everything to get there, and I wasn't going to spend it on making her feel forgiven. You left, I said one last time, quiet. We stayed. Then I said goodnight, and I closed the door, gently, no slam the way I'd closed it 2 years before, and I turned the deadbolt, and I stood in my own hallway and waited to feel something like grief, and what I felt instead was the strangest, steadiest thing, peace, the kind you can only earn on the far side of a thing you thought would kill you. Daddy, Ivy called from the kitchen, how do you spell because? Because, I called back, walking toward her, toward the light, toward the calendar with all our block letters and all our ordinary days written down and kept. Come on, let's get your brother. Dinner. Outside, the porch light stayed on a while longer, the way it always did, gold on an empty step. Then it clicked off because nobody was standing there anymore. Inside, everybody was. Inside, everybody always had been. For years, I thought being left meant something was missing in me, that I hadn't been enough to keep her. It took a courtroom and a stuffed rabbit and 2 kids who never once had to wonder where I was to teach me the thing I'll leave you with. We were never the ones who weren't enough. We were the ones who stayed. And staying, it turns out, is the whole inheritance. The only thing you can hand a child that no one can ever take back. The pancakes, by the way, were perfect the next morning. Nobody burned a thing.